Did you get your flu shot yet?
No, I don't really get vaccines.
Oh, really? Why not?
Well, can't they get you sick?
Well, actually, no, they can't. Vaccines, so a lot of people think that vaccines can get you sick because a lot of times after you get a vaccine, people tend to feel sick. That's actually because your immune response is kicking in. A lot of things about our immune response, such as inflammation and fever, are actually mechanisms that help us fight off a disease and neutralize infections so that we can actually store a memory response for the next time we encounter that specific virus or bacteria. And also, a lot of people think that vaccines can make you sick because there are certain types of vaccines that do include a whole live pathogen in them, like a virus or a bacteria. For example, like a lot of the flu shots are part of this class of vaccines called live attenuated. Those vaccines in particular, they have the whole like flu virus in them, but what they do is they kind of mute that part of the virus that causes infection, so that when we deliver the vaccine and like the virus ends up in your body, it's not actually able to make you sick, but it still looks like itself. So your body can recognize it, create a response for it, and then recognize it again the next time that you encounter that virus.
Oh, okay, that makes so much more sense. Yeah. But like, why should I care about like how my choice to be vaccinated affects other people?
I actually have a really good image to show you about that. So I actually put together this little resource about how vaccines save lives. And something that's really important when it comes to vaccinations is this concept of herd immunity. So specifically with the types of vaccines that are live attenuated and you have the whole live pathogen going into your body, there is this very, very, very small chance that virus can revert back to an active form and cause infection. Very, very small. And in a normal, healthy person, that wouldn't necessarily be something of concern if that were to happen, especially considering how little, like how low amount of a virus that we put into the body in a vaccine. It's usually a lot less in your body than you would encounter in the wild if you developed a real infection, because then in that sense, the virus is proliferating and growing and infecting multiple cells, and it's like you end up with more virus in your body than you naturally apply. But the issue with those kinds of vaccines is because there's that risk, people who are considered immunocompromised, so people with autoimmune disorders whose immune systems don't function properly, pregnant women fall into this category too, they can't receive these types of vaccines. So this concept of herd immunity is this idea that if all of the people around immunocompromised people get the vaccines against diseases that immunocompromised people can't. Looking at this graphic here, fewer people in the population are able to contract disease, so it can't spread far, and it most likely won't reach those people who aren't protected against it, because everybody around them can't carry the disease, so they can't give it to someone who isn't protected against it because they can't get infected themselves. And kind of like a follow-up point to that is like when we think about how, immunocompromised people, they run a risk of dying if they contract vaccine preventable disease that they can't be protected against. For example, the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, that's a live attenuated vaccine. So people who are immunocompromised can't get it. And if someone contracts measles, if they're immunocompromised, they can't really mount an immune response against it. But even so, even if you're not an immunocompromised person, normal healthy people, after having measles and fighting it off, their immune system is compromised for 2 to 3 years after their infection.
Wow.
So these sorts of dangerous diseases, they can lead to death a lot of the time. And so a point that I like to make is, we don't let people bring peanut butter to school when a kid has an allergy, but we let students who are unvaccinated come to school where there are other students who might be immunocompromised, or maybe pregnant teachers who might be immunocompromised.
That's so true. So now I understand about like herd immunity, but why should I get the vaccine if I'm already healthy?
Well, there are actually a lot of advantage to a healthy individual getting a vaccine, instead of encountering a disease naturally, quote unquote. Um, so vaccines are extremely effective in just overall lowering the incidence of disease. You see with things like diphtheria, pertussis, measles. When we introduced the vaccine, the rates of infection dropped drastically because, like I mentioned before, fewer people are getting disease, fewer places they can spread to.
Right.
But this other thing about healthy people getting vaccines is that your body is able to have a more effective immune response against something the second time it encounters it. So looking at this graph here, we have 5 different types of antibodies in our body. And you might know that antibodies are these special kinds of proteins that recognize what we call antigens, which would be pieces of like a bacteria or a virus.
Right.
And that's how our body knows that it's a non-self cell or material and it's dangerous to us. So that first time, that primary exposure, that first time that we see these pathogens, we see a spike in these 2 types of antibodies, the IgM and the IgG. The IgG tends to actually be most effective when it comes to like eliminating these sorts of dangerous viruses and bacteria from our body. But you see, the first time that we are exposed to a virus or a bacteria, we get this little spike of IgM and this smaller spike of the IgG. But then the second time that we encounter that same virus or bacteria, we get about the same response from the IgM, but all of a sudden we have a whole bunch more IgG being produced and able to respond to that infection, which actually makes it your body's able to fight off the infection better and faster.
Oh,
And usually you
okay.
experience less symptoms as a result of that.
So I heard that like vaccines can cause autism in children. Is that true?
So actually it's not. And that's actually a very common misconception. So first let's talk about like what's in a vaccine, right? So you have the active ingredient, which would be the piece of the bacteria or virus or the whole bacterial cell, whatever type of vaccine it happens to be. That little antigen, as we call it, your body's going to recognize and create antibodies against. Usually there's some sort of fluid. In this case, we're looking at water. Could also be like saline solution, something that's safe for your body. Just transportation really is what the fluid's there for. A lot of times certain types of vaccines, we add adjuvants, which kind of help strengthen the immune response against the vaccine, which actually makes it possible for us to add less of the antigen or active ingredient in the vaccine.
Okay.
So when we add things like adjuvants, certain types of chemicals like aluminum salts, calcium salts, those can help our body more effectively create an immune response when there's less virus or bacteria available in the vaccine. So that actually helps make vaccines safer. And then we have things like preservatives and stabilizers. A specific preservative that a lot of people associate with autism prevalence and vaccines and why people think that vaccines cause autism is a specific preservative known as thimerosal. So there was a journal article released by a doctor who has since lost his medical license, Andrew Wakefield. He suggested in a study that he did that thimerosal, which was at the time being used as a preservative in a lot of vaccines, was correlated with autism in children. There were a lot of concerns specifically about thimerosal because one of its components is ethyl mercury. That scares people because people think mercury, that's toxic, that's not good for me. But there's a difference between ethyl mercury and methyl mercury, first of all. So there's been a couple of studies done, and thimerosal is actually completely safe for us to have because ethyl mercury is something that our bodies are able to break down really quickly and we excrete really quickly. So the risks of it being toxic to us are extremely low compared to this other compound, methyl mercury, which is what we typically think of when we think of like fish that have a high mercury content, toxic to us. Another thing to note is that toxicity is really dependent on the dose of whatever you have. So there are a lot of things that we have on a daily basis. Think about like vitamin B. We have too much vitamin B, that can be toxic to us potentially. It's all about how much is in your body and how quickly your body's able to eliminate it. Another thing to think about with this is like when you think of ethyl alcohol versus methyl alcohol, we're able to drink ethyl alcohol, like that's the alcohol that we drink. But then there's other types of alcohol like methyl alcohols that can make us, that are really toxic to us and can make us really sick. So there have been plenty of studies to show that thimerosal is not linked to autism. Some people also think it's linked to ADHD, which it's not. And it's no longer used in vaccines, actually, as a result of all the controversy over this. No longer used in vaccines, yet in many countries, the prevalence of autism has gone up in the over 2 decades since we discontinued the use of their thimerosal in vaccines. So this idea that vaccines can cause autism is pretty unfounded.
Okay. And then lastly, I know with like new vaccines, like with the COVID-19 vaccine, it was made like fairly quickly. So how do I know it's like safe to put into my body?
So I'll give you a counter question for that.
Okay.
Did the iPhone 14 take less time to make than the iPhone 2?
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's because we already had research supporting half of the manufacturing. You think about it, right? You have, looking at the iPhone example, making the iPhone 14, you already have the basic model of the iPhone. You figured out all of the mechanics, you know the majority of the iPhone and the processes involved. You've already made plans and successfully created models and tested them.
Right.
And then there's just a few new modifications for this newer model. When you look at things like the COVID vaccines, a lot of the research needed to make the majority of those vaccines, like the majority of the components and get them together to make those vaccines had already been done. For example, if we've already tested that, let's say, formaldehyde, which is often found in trace amounts in vaccines and it's listed as an ingredient because it can be present in trace amounts through transfers and washes and that sort of thing. You know, we've already tested that that's safe,
right,
in vaccines. So if that were to be present in, like, say, a new vaccine against COVID or monkeypox or something of that nature, we already know that it's safe. So we don't have to spend time doing all of those tests again, and we can just focus on the new information that we need to finish the vaccine.
That makes a lot more sense.
And this last little thing I want to leave you with is that I love this meme. I was fully vaccinated along with millions of people, and guess who's perfectly fine?
Me and millions of
Me
people.
and millions. Lots of people get vaccinated. We've lots of evidence that vaccines are safe, and there's really no reason to not get them unless you happen to be immunocompromised and you've been advised by a physician.
Well, thank you so much for answering my questions. And to answer your question, I probably am going to go get the flu shot now.
Great. I have to go get mine next week, so if you want to come with me, we can go together.
Yeah, sounds good.